have. Thanks, Alex.
Thanks, Jason. So Rachel, love you to join me on stage. Well, I thought we were having technical issues already because you're up north.
Up north. Uh-oh. We did test before and it was okay. Can you hear me now?
I can hear you perfectly.
Amazing.
So Rachel, thank you for joining us tonight. Why don't we start with just a high overview of your career? Start with just maybe what you did with Bram, with Five Crowd, and all the way till now. So gives context of where you're coming from and helps people understand.
Yeah, happy to. So I went to Queen's University and then graduated and went into the corporate world, cut my teeth in traditional marketing at American Express and Johnson & Johnson. And while at Johnson & Johnson, actually led recruiting for the marketing and sales team. So we were hiring for all the different functions with a really good, well-oiled machine. So hopefully that'll come into play later in the conversation. And then actually left Johnson & Johnson to start my own company with a co-founder named Bram Warshawski. And essentially what we did was we built enterprise software that connected a global network of freelancers with Fortune 1000 clients. So we did B2B sales on one side and then traditional user growth on the other. Plus we had a software team that basically built that and connected the two. So that business had software developers, we had sales folks, and then a very large disparate network around the world.
And why don't you talk about EF?
Acquired by a portfolio company of Onyx, the private equity firm. So I ended up working.
Can you repeat that? Because I think I lost you for a second. So.
Yep. So Bram and I were building this company, Five Crowd. We were not for sale, the delusional millennials on this crazy path to build.
Okay, I feel like we're playing a bit of, the great thing about using new technology and this is why you have to recruit more technical people is sometimes it glitches out, and I feel like we're playing a bit of miming right now. So Rachel, can you hear me?
I can hear you perfectly.
Okay, I can't hear you.
All right.
Oh no. Can you guys hear me?
You
can hear me. I'm seeing all the yes we cans. Oh, the yes we cans. What a supportive audience.
Okay, so everyone can hear you except for me.
I can't hear Alex. This is just hilarious. This is a good teaser for the session next week on Pitch Karaoke.
Yeah. So you can't hear me now? So I can hear Rachel. Okay. But now, can you hear me now, Rachel?
I can hear you now. Can you hear me now?
Wow, good.
Wow, everybody. Okay, well, we're going to be doing a fun improv skit next week, so more to come, but this is a good warm-up for that.
Yeah, and so, I don't know if people heard you talk about EF.
So did not get into EF, so sold my company, worked for the company that purchased my business, which was a big business, large technical team, and then ended up joining where I now am, a group called Entrepreneur First. And essentially what we do is we look for the world's most ambitious technical talent and commercial talent. So up and coming CTOs and up and coming CEOs. We pay them to quit their jobs. So we pay 3,500 Canadian as a stipend, and we help them start companies. So we're actually recruiting for this September to bring a group of 80 plus people together. We have almost the whole cohort filled at this point. So we are looking for a few more people to join us. And then they come for the first 3 months, test out different ideas, and then they pitch their ideas to us, and then we fund them. And we're backed by some of the world's biggest investors. We've got a $140 million fund that powers us. So if you're interested in applying, I'll throw in my prompt for the group that's listening. And the application deadline's April 30th. So check it out.
Cool. Thanks for explaining your background. So I think it's very important for this crowd to understand it because you're not a technical person yourself. You're not a programmer. So, and you've now had two key roles in your life where you've had to recruit programmers as a founder and as the head of EF. So wide-ranging question to start with. How do you do it? How do you create the job description? How do you qualify people? What's the process you've done to become smart at recruiting technical people?
It's a great question. And so I'd say the framework of hiring around what are the competencies you're looking for in the role, whether it's a technical role or a sales role or a marketing role, that idea of starting at the high level and saying, what are you looking for is the first thing. So for EF, for example, a few of the things we look for is clarity of thought. So if someone's super technical, are they able to boil something up to the 50,000 foot view and explain it in really simple terms? And then are their skills widely applicable? So all to say, we've got a clear rubric of what we're looking for. And I think step one, and probably the hardest thing, is being clear on what you're looking for. And then once you know, you can actually start going and figuring out with questions or with support to try and dig into that.
So let's break that apart a bit. So when you say you need to know what you want and be very clear on that, is that the language, is it the year's experience, or is it saying front end versus back end? And how do you get that understanding?
So my take is it's competency based. So what are the competencies you need in the role? And that can include, a cultural element to that. That could include like true hard technical skills, or that could be behavioral competencies. Like one of the things we look for at EF, whether commercial talent or technical talent, across everybody, we need to see that you have a drive to achieve. So this like crazy hunger to win against all odds, like that grittiness and resilience, that's something we see across the board. So it's more, in my opinion, it's more about competencies versus needs to have 1 year of experience or 5 years of experience, because ultimately, if you've got someone who's got a crazy drive in their 1 year out of school, they might be able to do like pretty unbelievable things versus someone with more years experience.
So is that different than recruiting for like a sales and marketing person? Because it sounds like you're talking about the slope of learning versus what they know right away. And so when you look for marketing or a non-technical person, would you be creating a job description the same way?
So I would say the competencies are very much like I've approached it the same. I'd love to get your thoughts on it. I think what does differ is actually testing the technical skills. So for example, at 5 Crowd in my business, the final step would always be like a high level set of technical questions. And because to your point, I'm not technical. I know enough to be dangerous, but I wouldn't be able to actually assess, two developers in their comparable skill set. So that's where we'd bring someone in who's got that deep expertise. And at 5 Crowd, we asked the same 3 questions to every developer. And it was pretty obvious with those 3 questions if the person would be able to step into the role with success or not. So I think it's looking at the competencies, and then if one of them has that hard technical skill, making sure that you've got a way to vet for it, which you might have a similar thing on sales, right? You might actually want to see some pitch as a hard technical skill before hiring them for the role.
So that's interesting, because when you're focused on the technical competency and sort of the characteristics of the person you want, it doesn't sound like what I see with most job postings. It's usually 5 years of Ruby and Rails experience, front end developer, and it gets very numeric and experience based. So are you saying that's not nearly as important as the capabilities and the ability to learn? And how do you? So let's start there, and I have a follow-up question.
Yeah, I think absolutely. Like the capabilities to learn and the demonstrated ability to add value is massive. And so a couple of things that have stood out that I'll kind of speak to in candidates I've interviewed in the past. And one person comes to mind that didn't have the strongest technical skills. On paper, they weren't necessarily the strongest. But they reached out with a very customized and personalized message with really thoughtful, targeted questions about the company. It was clear they were super well researched, had been thinking a lot about the company and then what their role would be to fit in. And based on that kind of got them the hook in the door. And then thereafter, after they had gone through the interview process, they then followed up and shared, hey, here's how I think I can add value beyond just X, Y, Z. So they actually shared like a mini presentation afterwards saying, here's how I think I can augment and really add value, not just to this part that you're hiring for, but to all the other areas. So I think when you see that drive and you see that hustle, I think as a candidate, the world's your oyster and how you stand out, right? At the end of the day, people are looking to find amazing new players to build their team. And if you can showcase that and try and do that in unconventional ways.
So then you get the job description. I understand what you're looking for. Now, in this job market, there's a dearth of talent. So how do you find it? How do you get the job description out there? How do you get the applications in? And then how do you judge them? Like it sounds like you did some of the judging, the qualitative stuff yourself, and you got someone to do the actual technical skills. But like, first of all, let's break this down. Like first, how do you get the word out? How do you get the talent to find you and apply?
So I think the first, this idea of employer branding, you want to be really, really clear about who you are and what you're not. Because it's what you're not is almost just as important as who you are, so that you attract the right people to your business, right? So with Entrepreneur First, we look for folks that are pre-idea, pre-company, pre-co-founder. So ultimately what we're trying to do is find people before they've started a company, but they really want to build something and they've been looking in different problem spaces. So we need to be really, really focused just on that part versus being open to anyone in the tech world saying like, hey, we're a program that you could come join, right? Or we're just, another accelerator kind of thing. So I think the first piece is being really, really tight in your branding so that you attract the right people, then also repel the wrong people, which is a good thing, right? So I think the key is having that clear employer branding as the first step. And then once you've done that, and I always think about it as how do you attract and then how do you drive referrals? So if you can attract with that employer brand and demonstrate that, you've got, certain people that have been through your company or your program with success, but then also have some kind of word of mouth where people are excited about what they've done and, drive referrals. That's ultimately, in my past as well with 5Crowd, with Johnson & Johnson, referrals was the number one way that we were able to drive, drive inbound interest and recruit, right? It's that old adage of it's who you know, but it really is, right? It's who, and it's why like nights like tonight are so important, where you can meet someone, have a great connect, and then follow up with them afterwards and potentially tap into that network.
So I want to play that, flip that around. So if you're the talent, if you're someone that's looking for a job, how do you understand when someone speaks to you? Because to some extent, like lots of engineers speak to say, okay, I'm in a bank, I just gonna want to work for a startup, or maybe I want to go start something. So how do you find that opportunity? How do you screen yourself into a job, or filter yourself in? So like, what would you do if you're on the other side?
So I think there's one really hard thing, but it's, I think, the most helpful thing, which is be really, really clear on what you want. So on this flip side of an employer brand, being really, really clear on who you are, as the candidate, be really, really clear on what you want. So I'll pick on a non-technical example, but of myself. I was a couple years out of school. I was thinking about taking the entrepreneurial leap, and I had some hypotheses on what that would be. And so before I had started my business, I was also thinking about joining a tech company. And my brief was very tight. I wanted to be hire 2 to hire 10. So a really, really early stage employee, pre-funding in the healthcare space, that ideally worked in XYZ. And so the tighter you can be and say like, look, it doesn't have to be exactly this. If you can be really specific in what you're looking for, it's a lot easier for people to help you, because they can then catalog and figure out like, okay, yeah, I know 3 companies like that. I find it really challenging now when my old corporate friends from, back in the corporate days say like, hey, I want to join a tech company. It's like, okay, cool. But like, there's a lot of them. Help, like, give me a little bit more, right? And so I think on the flip side, the same thing goes with technical talent. When you think about like, what do you want? Do you want to be, if you're a back end, do you want to be rounding yourself out to be able to full stack, right? And like have other components to that. Do you want to work in a small team so you can get that kind of exposure? So I think it goes really to that point of like, what exactly do you want? Writing it down in one sentence. And then when you come to a night like tonight, you can then specify that, and then people can actually help.
So I want to understand this a bit more, because I love the specificity you had when you were looking 2 years out of school. But again, a lot of people don't know what they don't know.
Yeah.
Right?
Took me probably, yeah, no, I was just going to say, it probably took like 8-12 months to figure that out. But I met the big companies, like big startups, and I was like, this isn't for me. Here's why. And then I kind of went through, as I was talking to different people about those experiences, trying to parse in, okay, what is attractive to me and why, and what are my skills best utilized for? So I agree with you. I don't think you just make it up overnight. It takes lots of conversations, research, reading Glassdoor, seeing what people are saying, looking on, Startup North on, nights like tonight to really kind of get that information.
So let's now take this for EF. So if I want, I heard one thing is I want to be an entrepreneur, I'm a technical talent, I may want to look at EF. But, how much, I think EF filters it down even further. So if you're a technical talent, what would be EF right for and what would be wrong for?
Great question. So we look for behavioral competencies and then ability competencies. I'll speak to the ability because that's probably the most helpful. So we look at 3 things. So the first is, do you have a pretty rare technical skill set? So, do you have something that no one else can do, or, a point of difference that if you were to work on a specific business, you'd have a right to win in it? And then not only do you have that rarity and that technical skill, the second criteria is wide applicability. So if you're like a crazy technical guru, but it's in a really niche thing and it can't be commercialized, that's really hard, right? So we look for that rarity plus a wide applicability. And then the third thing is what I was mentioning earlier, this idea of clarity of thought. So can you take a really complicated technical concept, simplify it so that any investor can understand it, or any family member can understand it and advocate for you? So that's on the ability side. And then on the behavioral, I won't go into each one, but I think that drive to achieve and that like resilience and grittiness and just like hustle to get something done, it's probably the biggest one that we see as being critical for entrepreneurs.
So that's interesting, because what you didn't say there was what the technical language is. Like if someone has C+, are they the right fit? And also what type of startup they want to start. Because I don't think, from my experience, I don't think EF is really someone who wants to go start the next social media app.
So it goes down to that technical skill set. And then when they partner with a co-founder, right, on the program, that's where, so long as there's wide applicability and they're able to jump in and build in a really effective way, when they find the right commercial partner, that's where they can be augmented and build in a really interesting space. Maybe they've worked in before, or maybe it's where their partner has worked and spent quite a bit of time. So to your point, interestingly, we actually just vet talent. We don't look at industry specific pieces. We really just look at the raw technical skills to see if that person has what we think it takes to be successful in the program.
Cool. And then I'm going to flip back to the like founder recruiting side. So you've got your job description, you've narrowed down on who you want to hire and your employer brand. Now you get a bunch of applications in. And it's interesting because I think lots of people put the I want 3 years in Ruby's experience, so it's easy to filter. So how do you filter them? Because resumes look great. Someone has spent the time will seem appealing. You can have, I don't have to, I don't know about you, but if I get 100 resumes, I don't have time to interview 100 people. So how do you filter them and make sure you're talking to the right people?
So first off, if you're a startup with 100 resumes coming in, congrats, because that's freaking amazing. I went from at Johnson & Johnson, we'd post a marketing role and we'd literally get 2,000 to 3,000 applications. And it was like, oh, this is fun. We'll send it to HR and HR will help us filter who we get. And when Bram and I first posted our first job descriptions for a developer, we had it posted, we shared it, we tried drumming it out, and I don't think we got anyone. And then we went to Waterloo, we tried to drum up and get people to apply. Similarly, it was so difficult. So I guess my headline would be, if that's your problem, that's a fair problem to have as a new startup. But let's say that is the problem. I'm a really big fan of some kind of skill test as a first vetting prompt. So that skill test could be something on the technical side, right? So it could be a small component of what you're looking to build, like, if you were a startup with your first technical hire, maybe the question is, hey, we're looking to build an MVP with XYZ. How would you do it? Can you give us walk me through your methodology for it? So in the few times I've been so fortunate to have 100 plus resumes come through for a job in the startup world, I've usually put in that skill test so that those who are really interested put in that effort. And then once they have put in that effort, you're seeing the actual work product, which is an easier thing to vet prior to then actually doing the behavioral. So that's been my experience that I've enjoyed and have found useful.
So it's interesting. So, but again, let's go back to the positive case. You get 100 applications. You go back and ask all 100 people to take this test, or do you filter them out before that?
So it depends, right? So it depends on the role. Let's say a software developer, probably wouldn't have 100 people do it.
Yeah.
If it was let's pick on marketing for a second. If it was for a content role, sure. Yeah, I would go back to the full group and say hey, it's been a really competitive process. Can you put together an example piece of content that you think would be great for, our brand, and then see what people come back with and use that as part of the vetting process. The more traditional thing to do would be a phone screen, 20-minute call, get people on. But really that's, I think, if you truly have 100 people that are all, fighting to break down your door, I think you've got the license as an employer to be a bit more choosy and ask for that kind of component.
I do like your reality setting there, that it's a nice problem to have, because most startups don't have a brand. And it's interesting because and that goes back to my original question, is how do you get that brand? You can focus on getting that brand and being very clear and you communicate, but how do you get the credibility? How do you get someone excited to apply to you?
So
any thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, I'll tell you my personal experience. It was really hard. But there were two things that did it for us. One was we found specifically on the developer side that great technical talent wants to learn from great technical talent. So the most important thing is having a senior technical person that people want to work and learn with. So that was a really hard thing for us to find our CTO. But once we did, people were really, really keen to work with him. And then the second piece for us was University of Waterloo has an amazing co-op program. And once we had a few reps of co-ops under our belt, all of a sudden we developed quite a good brand within the Waterloo community, which then allowed us to start hiring some of the stronger technical talent. But that was not a 1 month journey. That was like a multi-year journey, right? But the key to the whole thing, I think, was having that brilliant senior that people would want to learn and work with.
Yeah, and also it sounds like it always goes back to the people, right? When you're joining a startup, it's about the people you're joining. Having that strong CTO or technical lead helps. We have 1 minute left. So what are your deep, dark secrets about technical recruiting that everyone should know?
I think if you're looking to get hired, do something to stand out. It sounds simple and obvious, but send your follow-up note, talk about why you're so excited about the company. Entrepreneur First has 10,000 plus applicants a year. Almost no one does that. It's wild. Like, do small things like that make you stand out, that show, your engagement, excitement. I'd say that's on the candidate side. On the employer side, I'd say just be clear on what you want. So don't get fussed on like the 1 year, 3 year competent, like years of experience. Because ultimately, if you boil it back to like, what do you want this person to be able to add from a competency standpoint in the business? That's really what's going to move your team forward. And then the last thing I'll plug in to your point of the 20 seconds left. I had my resignation letter written for 12 months before I resigned from J&J. So I was like humming and hawing about taking the entrepreneurial leap. And someone had given me the advice, which was, the opportunity cost just gets higher and higher. So as you go on through your career, it just gets more expensive, more difficult, more demanding, more commitments. And so I just feel really grateful that, at that time in my life, like mid-20s, took the leap. And for anyone listening, that's like, do I start something? Do I not? Do I take a job? The time's now to start a business, whether with EF or not. It's an important thing to bet on yourself and really try and take the step.
All right, I can join one of the great startups here tonight. I'm actually going to ask one more question before Jason kicks us off. Talk about hiring slow and firing fast. So engineering talent's so hard to find. How much leeway do you give the engineer to perform? We've had someone else come up and say, hey, I give them 2 weeks to not perform. I fire them. Like, is that like, what's your experience here?
I think it's dependent on what the business is. So for Five Crowd, every hire we brought on was massively important because we were increasing our development team by 25%, then by 10%. So each person is making such a big impact on the team. So we weren't just hiring slow, we were hiring really slow. Team lunch, make sure everyone gets, is working. And also, like, let's not only do a technical test. This was a really unconventional thing, but we actually had people take a vacation day and work with us for a full day before they joined. So we actually immersed them in our team to really make sure it was a good thing, giving them work that day and seeing how they did. So if it's a small team like that, I'm a huge advocate of hire slow because it's so painful to remove someone from a team thereafter, especially on such a small team. If you're a larger company and you've got a good probation period and you think you've made a good bet and the candidate thinks they've made a good bet, you've got that 90-day window where you set clear goals and you can have some honest conversations if it's not working. So I think for a bigger company, there's probably a little bit more leeway. But my perspective would be, as a startup, you want to really make sure, really make sure that it's the right person to have a strong foundation for your company.
Awesome. Rachel, thank you so much. I wish I had this conversation with you about 10 years ago when I ran my last startup. It would have been really helpful.
Thanks, Alex, for having me. Cheers.
My pleasure.
Written, she could have chatted with you about that. That was really great. Thanks for joining. Alex, what are your main takeaways from that conversation?
You have to build a brand to find the people.